Just running around.
Really is.
Crashing the whole way. I mean, it was a challenge to him.
We didn't know the school was there. We don't know if he came in there to be the noise or if he was actually in the group.
Yep.
You won't make that mistake again.
No.
No.
Well, school, we had him on camera, but I got him video. He got one tips back quite a bit, so you kind of really, knew it was him.
Well, that one, we never had pictures of or nothing.
Okay,
Yeah.
just curious.
Same thing, though, it's like we called, and then 45 minutes later,
I go to South Carolina.
we don't have one branch closed.
Yeah.
Never heard a thing, one branch. There's only one thing that breaks branches up there like that. And he was within 50 yards before we knew he was there.
Wow.
And then it was, just a light call and
Maybe not quite.
yeah, how big they are.
Not
And then he grunted at us. And then he was coming,
Yeah, I'd say.
but he thrashed a couple bushes in front of us and stuff. And
Summer,
it's like,
100%.
oh shit.
Yeah.
I laid down on the ground.
Rotate.
Oh, yeah.
Those guys were on this side of me.
It's like nice community because that's a hassle.
Out of my chair, to the ground, I'm just laying there.
Like you should guide your trip.
So, yeah, it's fine. I like it.
We're not getting, I tell you what, we're not getting many cows on this.
But quite a few. We have some.
Yeah, we did, what we did last
Yeah,
time.
I won't say a lot, but we had cows. We had actually one bull, somehow he just caught us. Probably when he loses it.
Moving on.
Cause I know none of those collars are working now.
Yeah. So that picture, and they tell you like probably 9 years old.
Yeah. Well, we.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our October meeting of Fish and Wildlife Board. First thing we will do is introductions, and Ryan, why don't we start with you over here and go around the table?
Ryan Kilborn, Orange County.
Nick Burnham, Windsor County.
Jeff Corey, Franklin County.
Brad Ferland, Caledonia County.
Beth Dimeling, Grand Isle County.
Bob Patterson, Addison County.
Online,
Allison Frazier, Chittenden County.
you guys, Artie, can you hear me?
Martin Van Buren, Rutland County.
I think your volume may be off. Allison, can you hear me?
Yep.
Volume.
You were muted.
Martin Van Buren, Rutland County.
Allison, can you introduce yourself, please? Just we're doing a volume check.
Allison Frazier, Chittenden County.
Nothing yet.
Martin
We're
Van
still
Buren,
working on it.
County.
Sorry, Neil Hogan, Bennington County.
Did you get me? Martin Van Buren, Rutland County.
Okay, we're gonna take a quick break and try to resolve the volume issue from for those that are online. So we'll take a quick recess.
Sure, you're here. Yeah, you're all the way up.
That room there last time.
I think we had the bear presentation in there.
Pretty much, he's got a camp up there. He runs campus here, there, wherever this.
I used to have a lot of meetings.
Yeah. Oh, my wow.
Andrew said this was underwater.
Oh,
It's gotta be something of that nature. Isn't that funny though?
The day of the flood. Yes, go to Vermont.
Even the emergency center. The emergency center had to be.
That's one of our.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Brand new. It had never been used before, I don't believe.
We're on the second floor. The water side. And driving through. There's the molten poles. Yeah, with water.
And any of those poles with collars still have sleeves on them.
Yeah, because they.
Did you see a lot of deer up in Anacostia?
A lot.
So just so everybody knows, just that we're still on the peak curve this year, so just so everybody knows, that's all. I'll have that discussion.
Yeah.
It's not water.
He must have been rubbing on stuff and had it, he's been here.
They've been taking some ass bucks in our trees.
But it must have been when he was rubbing on stuff, it just kind of fucked over his forehead there.
Yeah, so odd. I think it's falling off.
Good possibility. Then.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that something?
Huh, that's up in north.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
People online, we're gonna hang up and try to join again, just so you know.
Yeah.
Can you say something?
Hello?
Hey.
Yeah.
This is one that, I had 21, we had him. If he's still around.
Yeah.
He does that. Good for him.
You get some parents with that.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for resolving the issue.
Yeah.
We will go now to, Marty, why don't we start with you online? If the members online could introduce themselves, that would be great.
Martin Van Buren, Rutland County.
Allison Frazier, Chittenden County.
Neil Hogan, Bennington County.
Okay, I think that's it for board members. Commissioner, I will turn it over to you and let you introduce your department and staff that are here tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My name is Jason Batchelder. I'm the newest Fish and Wildlife Commissioner of about 80, 90 days, something like that. Very sorry I couldn't join you in person. I have a sick child at home, and but I'm all ears and very excited to be engaged tonight. I will have an update at the end, and please elbow me, Mr. Chair, if there's anything you'd like me to take part in or help with. I don't guess you will, but I'll turn it over to the room. Unless I think Hannah's probably both on screen and in the room, but I'll turn it over to Hannah either way. Thank you so much.
Sure. I'm Hannah Smith. I'm general counsel with the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Jackie Cabo, Black Bear Project Leader.
Dustin Stedman, Director of the Warden Service.
John Austin, Director of the Wildlife Division.
It's also Program Manager for Wildlife Management.
Andrea Shortsleeve, Chief of Operations for the department.
Abigail Connolly, Principal Assistant Commissioner.
And also just joining us.
Richard Craig Lamoille.
Welcome. Okay, Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourselves. First item on the agenda tonight is to review and approve the minutes of July 16th.
Make a motion to approve as always.
I have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Yes.
I have a second. Any comments or feedback on the minutes as presented? If not, all those in favor of approving minutes as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, minutes approved. Next thing we have is public comments. Is there a sign-up sheet? Okay, we have 3 members in the room tonight from the public that would like to speak. We'll start off with Justin Lindholm from Mendon. If you can just want to stand there, I think they can see you on the camera.
Hi, I'm Justin Lindholm from Mendon, and it may seem a little early to be talking about next year's doe permit allocations, antlerless permit allocations, but we're taking out more deer next year overall because we have 7 different new ways of taking deer that we didn't have before. We have to be very careful next year in allocating antlerless permits. The problem we're going to have, and that's why I want to bring this up early, is we may end up with having to hand out many less doe permits or antlerless permits because of the likelihood of a lot more deer being shot. So we have to keep in mind that the landowners get first priority and the non-landowners will stand even less of a chance. So it's going to look to a lot of people, and they're going to make people angry in the legislature among hunters, that the landowners will get many more permits compared to what's happened in the past compared to the non-landowners if we don't hand out a lot. And we can't hand out a lot. We have to play it safe. We got 7 different ways of taking more deer out, including during rifle season. We've really got to cut it down and see how that goes and then build up from there. So next year we have to keep that in mind. It could get nasty if we are handing out a lot less doe permits and the landowners get most of them next year. So keep that in mind. Maybe we should not let the landowners have so much of a chance. Well, I don't know. They won't like that, but think about it, folks.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Just a reminder, we have a 2-minute timeline for speaking. I just forgot to mention that earlier. Next up, I have Fred Schroeder, I'm sorry. Hi.
Fred Schroeder from Bristol. I'm here to talk about moose permits. The first moose permits were handed out in 1992. I know that because I helped open the envelopes of the first moose permits that were mailed into the Fish and Wildlife Department in St. Johnsbury.
Can whoever's online, please mute yourselves if you're not speaking? We're getting some feedback from online. Thank you. Sorry, Fred.
I was a seasonal technician in St. Johnsbury in 1992. So my point and the reason why I'm here is I'm opposed to the you losing your bonus points if you don't apply. I started applying in 2006 and life got ahead of me in 2017. I didn't apply. I lost 12 seasons of applications in that one not applying, in 2017. And I forgot to apply. And it wasn't, something happened, I just forgot to apply. And I lost 11 years or 12 years of my bonus points. And I'm opposed to that. I think that we should honor the bonus points that we have. I put in for archery for 6 years, lost those. I put in for the gun season, lost those. And if anything, could we do something like, if you put in for 10 years, could you keep those points? And I want to know, what's the incentive for Fish and Wildlife to even penalize you for not applying after a few years, for a year? Is there any kind of incentive? Did someone answer that for me? I know I'm hearing you speak, but, so I'd like to see something like that changed, and I'd like to see, ask, who do I talk to see something happen? Because I think there's a lot of people out there who have lost their bonus points over the years. And what happened to me when I lost them, I realized I lost them, and I applied the next year. I looked online and said 0. I got angry. I was upset. And I was upset at Fish and Wildlife for that law. I don't think it needs to be. I think you should honor the time you put in, the points you put in, the money you donate to keeping your bonus points. Other states do the same thing. They keep you keep your bonus points. You can apply. If you don't want to hunt, just like Vermont, if you don't want to hunt, you can apply for a bonus point. But if you forget, life gets ahead of you, you should be able to keep your bonus points. That's why I'm here. And how much time do I have?
You're hitting 2 minutes now.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Next up, I have Sarah Gorsland, Grand Isle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Gorsland. I'm up in Grand Isle. I'm the Vermont representative for Project Coyote here in the state. And we're basically dedicated to working with wildlife agencies, working with legislators, with communities and farmers to better coexist with wild carnivore species and to make sure that they are benefiting our forests. In Vermont, everything from rodent control and thereby control of diseases like Lyme disease to things like forest health and seed dispersal, which a lot of wild carnivore species help us with here in Vermont. I would like to welcome the new commissioner and say that I'm looking forward to working with you. I'm looking forward to working with everyone in this room towards the shared goals of improving our ecosystems here in Vermont as much as possible. I'll briefly speak about several different issues that we're concerned with at Project Coyote currently. One of them is we would like to see increased reporting of canid species in Vermont, especially coyotes. I also work for Northeast Wolf Recovery Alliance, which is a group of scientists and advocates for wolves who are supporting the natural dispersal of eastern wolves and gray wolves back into the northeastern states. We support natural rehoming, not reintroduction. I just wanted to clarify that. And we feel that if there was better reporting of coyotes killed in Vermont, that would support understanding and knowledge of wolves in the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. So I'd like to advocate for reporting of coyotes killed, and I look forward to the board hopefully taking up that issue at some point. I also wanted to advocate for shortening the bear hound hunting training season. Currently in Vermont, our June 1st start of that is out of step with other New England states, including New Hampshire, Maine, and New York, who all start their training season on July 1st, not June 1st. That gives mother bears and their cubs more time to find nourishment as they're emerging from hibernation, which we feel gives them a fairer shot at maintaining their lives during the start of that hound training season. We also advocate against hound hunting for the reason that it's a public safety issue. And as we've heard in Vermont recently, there have been a lot of conflicts between hound hunters and landowners or residents in Vermont who are just trying to use the forest for other things other than hound hunting. Am I at my 2 minutes?
You're getting there. You're there.
Okay. Okay. And last, I'll just say we would love to see a regulated coyote hunting season. I appreciate all of your time and thank you for being here tonight. Also, thank you to the Warden Service for all of your help out there with the wildlife violations. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was unaware that there was a sign up sheet.
Okay, if you could stand up, introduce yourself and let us know what town you're from.
Oh, yeah, sure. Be glad. Just a little flow with my foot. My name is Jeremy Ayotte from Fletcher, Vermont. And I'm not used to speaking in public. I usually just write online, but I just would like to say the utilization of science-based principles of wildlife management enhances universal appreciation for wildlife, nature, and associated recreational activities. This includes a broad spectrum of outdoor pursuits, including hunting, photography, fishing, camping, and hiking. Notably, these activities can complement one another rather than being mutually exclusive. Baiting is an outdoor pursuit which can create predictable shot opportunities by drawing an animal to a specific location, allowing the hunter to prepare for the shot. This method also increases the chances of stationary targets, enabling more precise shot placement for a quick and humane kill. Furthermore, baiting facilitates species identification by providing an opportunity to observe the animal for an extended period of time. As a hunter, to me, the experience of watching animals behave and interact is more important than harvesting organic meat. The harvesting part of the experience is the added bonus. Baiting enables the hunter to determine the animal's sex, age, and size, ensuring adherence to the hunting regulations and ethical choices. Although it's sustainable management practice, the long-term visibility of these opportunities is secured, allowing for diverse participation in nature-based activities. I would like to just follow up and end with that I really feel that we should never fear using tools that we know to be functional because of what others may say or do based on their feelings or reactions to what most people understand to be reality. Those who advocate for the eliminating of hunting as an option are advocating to undermine tested, established principles of responsible wildlife management. We need to continue focusing on methods that work and the dedication of our biologists and the Fish and Game Department since its inception. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have anybody online from the public that would like to take advantage of the 2 minutes?
First, we have Rod Coronado.
Rob, if you would like to speak, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, Rod Coronado from the town of Orange, and we live and work at Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary. We've been having a wonderful fall here at Sage Mountain. Bears have been active and the otters, and we organized an event called Our Outdoors in August, last weekend in August, and this was an event to increase outdoor recreation amongst marginalized folks, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And we had 70 participants at the event. And I really want to give a shout out to Nicole Meyer, the Hunter Education Director or Instructor with the Fish and Game Department. She was willing to facilitate some donation of wild game, bear, moose, and deer, which we prepared a wild game cooking workshop, which was amazing.
Rob, you just froze up on us. Okay, we'll pause you right there, Rob. Oh, there we go. Okay, Rob, we lost you for a few seconds there.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. I also wanted to welcome Jason to the team. Thank you for taking on the hot seat. And thank you also to Andrea Shortsleeve for sitting in it for a while. And I also wanted to thank the Warden Service as well for investigating the 2 incidents of bearhounder trespass that we might have all heard about in Guildhall and one in southern Vermont. And I think it's important to, as we grow a new generation of hunters and trappers, that we really root out the bad actors and the behavior that makes us all look bad. It's about building social tolerance for practices, not about eliminating them, in my opinion. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Next, we have Barbara Folletti.
Barbara Folletti. Are you with us, Barbara?
Muted.
She's muted. You're muted. If you're speaking, Barbara, we can't hear you or see you at this point.
Problems with. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, but there's an echo.
Okay. Yeah, I've been having problems with the audio. I cannot hear you, but if you can hear me, I can say what I can give you my public comment. And let me see if I can get the camera to work. Sorry, I'm having technical issues here. My name is Barbara Folletti, and I live in Huntington, Vermont. And I want to offer a comment about the posting of land. I feel that the commissioner's recent interpretation that posting is to be done on a calendar year basis is incorrect and creates a violation of property rights and is also unduly burdensome. The first point, there is nothing in the statute that defines annually. So it means once a year, which can be a calendar year, a fiscal year, or any designated 12-month period. And numerous Vermont agencies have annual registrations on a 12-month basis, not a calendar basis. So think driver's license, car registration, business registration, just to name a few. So if my posting registration expires on December 31st, how am I supposed to legally post my land for January 1st when my town office is closed? And if January 1st comes on a Friday, I can't get to the town office until Monday, which is January 4th, which leaves 3 days where I will not be able to legally post my land, which is a violation of my property rights. So I feel that defining land posting on a calendar year basis, while hunting and trapping licenses are provided on a seasonal basis across 2 years, is inconsistent. So if posting is going to be only good for a calendar year basis, then hunting and trapping licenses should also be on a calendar year basis. Now, in reality, I realize that's not practical. So I'm just pointing out what some of the issues are with this calendar year basis being used for posting land. And then last, requiring property owners to go out in January when there could be deep snow, there could be storms, there could be bad weather, makes what is already a burdensome process of having to sign and date every sign every year, makes it even more burdensome. So I'm asking the Fish and Wildlife Board to correct and clarify the interpretation of postings, and that it should be on a 12-month basis. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay,
We have another person, Catherine Gott.
Catherine Gott, I believe. Catherine, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Introduce yourself and what town you're from, and
Hi.
2 minutes.
Okay, hi. I'm Catherine Gott. I'm from Stowe, Vermont, and I'm here on behalf of a newly formed group. We actually had our debut at the July 4th parade in Stowe. The group is called the Stowe Bear Project, and our mission is to promote peaceful coexistence between people and bears through education and outreach in the Stowe community. And I'd just like to recognize the fact that Fish and Wildlife and ANR overall have partnered with the Bear Wise organization. I was very happy to see that when I saw that on the ANR homepage on the banner. And I'd also like to recognize Jacqueline Como, who I've worked with before as a member of the Stowe Conservation Commission. She came and spoke around 2 years ago in Stowe. And then also I'd like to thank the Warden Service for their response to the calls that they receive in Stowe. And the most recent one was the killing of a bear on the Top Notch property, which we believe it was it was a female bear, and we do believe that it was a sow with cubs. But hopefully the cubs will survive. But anyways, just like to say that I'm looking forward to working with Vermont Fish and Wildlife and also the DEC Solid Waste Program, as well as the town of Stowe and the waste haulers with promoting coexistence and also bear-wise practices to keep bears out of our trash, and so they're not so they don't become habituated. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone and introduce the group that's newly formed in Stowe. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Anyone else from the public would like to speak? Okay, not seeing anybody. Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for your input. First item on the agenda is to review language and to discussion and potential first vote on section 2 of Title 10, I believe, on big game reporting rulemaking. Yes.
To add.
Okay, Freya, why don't we do this? Sorry. Thank you, Hannah. Before we move on, there is a third. We have section 2 and section 2A on the agenda, items 3 and 4. And there's also a third section, section 5, which relates to bow and arrow standard. And although we probably shouldn't vote on that tonight, we can put it on the agenda to have the conversation and to find out what the changes are, and then we can vote on that at our next meeting. If that's, time allows for that. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I would like to make a motion that we add an item, and we can insert it between 4 and 5, and it's for section 5, bow and arrow standards. Rulemaking.
I'll second that.
Okay, and any comments or any other thoughts on that? Hearing none, all those in favor of amending the agenda as stated, signify by saying aye. All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, ayes have it. So we will insert section 5 between 4 and 5. Thank you, Hannah. So with that, let's move on to section 2, big game reporting rule. Okay.
Just by way of introduction, the section 2 of the board rules relates to reporting of big game, and 2A relates to tagging. And both of these proposed amendments are relatively minor in nature, and they're intended to clarify current practice and just provide some more clear process around both the reporting and tagging requirements. Hopefully that is tricky to see. So they're, again, relatively minor changes. And I will walk through the language changes that we're proposing here. Hopefully you all have a copy in front of you as well. The first change in section 2, we're proposing just in the second line, it refers to the definition of big game as defined by 10 VSA 4001, section 31. We're just proposing to strike this section number because as we update our definitions, sometimes those section numbers are off. So this still refers to that provision in statute where big game is defined, but it just avoids any inconsistency between the rule language and the statutory language. The second change would be to add a sentence at the end of paragraph A stating that no person shall knowingly make any false statement or include false information in such report, including false information related to the name of the person who harvested the big game animal and the date, time, and location of said harvest. This explicit false statement language is intended to allow for enforcement of this provision. I think that and the Colonel could provide better examples of this, but occasionally mistakes are made around the WMU you're in, and you intend to report correctly. This is to incentivize correct reporting so that the department has accurate data about where animals are harvested, and appropriately assign points to these violations. The violation of section 2 is a 10-point violation. Absent this explicit language about false statements, a violation of this provision would technically be an out of season violation, which would be 20 points. We don't think that in most situations, the violation does not warrant 20 points. It would be more appropriately enforced as a reporting violation rather than a season violation. Justin, if you have anything you want to add there, or if anyone has questions.
I think you summed it up very well. I think basically we're trying to create the appropriate tool to deal with the need at hand, as opposed to whacking everything with a sledgehammer, which is currently the only option available to the wardens, because the courts have not accepted the implied requirement to not falsely report your information, which seems intuitive, but.
So I have a question relative to that change, the false reporting. If somebody accidentally reports the wrong WMU, as that example that was stated, you have flexibility to let that go, or you have to charge that?
Well, no, so that's why it says knowingly.
Knowingly,
So
okay.
So what, I'll give you the exact example of what happens. Right now, pick your WMU, doesn't matter. Just, I live in K. So, and whether this is or is, I'm just gonna say it. So someone, you can report spike, you can shoot spikes in K, and someone's hunting in N, where you can't shoot spikes. And they're like, I'll just report it as K. What's the harm? And then what's happening is wardens are investigating these things for whatever reason, information or whatnot. And they literally were calling people. It's like, did you really hunt? Did you really shoot this in K? Like, nah, you got me. And the only thing we have is a sledgehammer. And it just doesn't seem appropriate to wail on someone who is trying to kind of do the right thing, not fully the right thing, but they could have called, but they didn't, but they're still trying to report the information. Because again, the courts have not accepted the idea that there's an implicit requirement not to lie on a big game report for whatever reason. And so this is simply trying to allow wardens to match the violation with an appropriate response, as opposed to really hitting people. But if you were to accidentally report K and had shot it in N, and it was a legitimate mistake in the reporting, we're not going to, we're not going to come out. That's why it says knowingly, right? There's no intent there to penalize people for accidentally reporting the wrong thing. It's to, one, incentivize people to not report the wrong thing, because that information is important to the deer biologist and how they calculate numbers and all that. But also, again, to just allow the appropriate penalty to fit what's happening. Hopefully, I don't know if I answered your question, Brad, but that.
Yeah, no, it did.
Okay.
It did. Yep.
The next change in subsection or paragraph B is just to correct the cross-reference to the moose rule. Since the moose rule was updated, the section numbers changed. And the final change is in paragraph D, which allows the commissioner to reimburse authorized agents a fee of $1 for each report taken on species where reports are required by law. So the proposed change would allow the reimbursement to increase. The reason that we're not establishing a set dollar amount is because the reimbursement comes from the department's budget. And so the increase would be contingent on us being basically fiscally able to increase the dollar amount. So there will be no decrease, but we've heard the feedback about increasing the incentive for check station agents, increasing the number of agents, the need for more authorized agents around the state. And we are hoping that absent budgetary constraints, we will be able to increase that dollar amount. But this change to the rule would give us some flexibility.
Okay. I have one more question. If somebody, again, with the way, I'm looking forward to the new rules that we've passed here recently and for 2026. And if somebody falsely reports that they shot a doe for the purpose of wanting to shoot a second buck, is that covered under this?
No, not. This only applies to when you go to a reporting station and say what it is that you have and where you shot it. That's what this applies to. Not someone makes an accidental identification in the woods and either then calls or.
Well, is it-
referring to the Ernebuck.
I see what you're saying, to the Ernebuck.
Yeah, if somebody, for whatever reason, chooses not to, they don't want to shoot a doe, they want to shoot a second buck and they falsely report.
Then yeah, it would cover that. Yes,
This
if
would
they,
cover
if they
that.
falsify what they, yes, if you say you shot a buck and you, or I mean, a doe and you shot a buck and the warden investigates, this would cover that, yes.
Any false statement in
Yeah.
your report.
So that would apply to location, implement,
Person who shot it.
person who shot it, yeah. And we do get a fair amount of that where families will purchase tags and then one individual will fill the tags and say that X family member shot it.
And the big game species that are to be reported are, besides deer, are what?
Deer, bear, moose, turkey, and that's really it for recording.
Any questions? Carl?
I know that long term, the issue of somebody being compensated for checking in the animal, in my mind, it would be a lot simpler long term if we did something similar to what Maine does, where you pay the agent, the hunter does. And then that takes it out of the hands of the department. But I know that at the same time, getting anything that may seem simple through legislature may not be simple. So I don't know if there's any reservation there, or is there going to be an attempt to try and do that in the department?
Well,
That's not an approach that we've discussed before, Bob, but it's an interesting idea. So we should take that under advisement. We're so accustomed to the system that's been in place for I don't know how many decades. And so our approach has been, how can we likely approach the legislature with an eye towards making a modest increase to the payment to the reporting stations. But the point's well taken. I mean, our budget's a challenge, and this will be an added challenge to that.
So as of right now, archery you can report online. But the rifle season, the buck season, we have to report at a
Along with bear, the moose. all three.
the same. Most must have to all go through the agents, no matter the implement. I think my thought is Bob's of the person taking the animal and doing the reporting, if the people reporting it had a set fee, it seems logical to me that that would be something I would support. And if somebody's gonna do it for $2 instead of $10, you're gonna go to the $2 person first, most likely. I think that's a good thought, Bob, on that.
Okay, I think that's a great conversation. And I'm an advocate of paying those guys more than they get paid, or finding a way to pay them more. I'm not sure that that's relevant to this language. So if we just bring it back to this language, does anybody have any questions relative to this change on section 2 for reporting of big game? If not, can I get a motion to accept the language as presented?
Make a motion.
I make a motion to accept it.
Okay, and I have a second. Okay, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the language for 10 BSA section 2 as presented, signify by saying yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, next item is item number 4, section 2A, big game tagging rulemaking. Anna, I believe. Okay,
as well. share the language. Some context for this one, currently, since the, there's a lack of clarity around what's required, what you're actually required to physically attach to your animal when you're tagging it. And this is an attempt to clarify that. The first change, again, is to strike that section number in the definitions section of statute to avoid inconsistency. Second change is to clearly state that you shall immediately tag the big game carcass upon taking with the applicable tag or permit information for that animal, which shall include the person's name and the tag or permit number. This requirement would simply require that hunters include the number of the permit that authorizes the taking of that species during that season to whatever they're tagging their animal with. Anything to add there?
So for everybody that remembers back in the days of the original paper licenses, not the online printed one, but they came with Tyvek tags. And when we went away from that, ironically, looking back, there was really no where in law that it required you to attach the Tyvek tag to the animal because we never specified. It was just sort of presumed. But when we went to the online license, the issue became apparent because we don't specify what a tag is, and you could add a leaf to it for that matter and say you tagged it. We had never thought to identify specifically that we're referring to those Tyvek tags back in the day when we issued the license with the color tags, and it simply presented itself as an issue when we sort of technology moved along and we went to online licenses. And people are there's a fair amount of abuse of this section of law around the fact that we don't specify. So this is simply trying to close a loophole that was created by going to the online license system and doing away with the old style Tyvek tags. But realistically, that would have, if someone had thought to challenge it, it would have been an issue back then too, because we never identified what we meant by a tag.
So what is an applicable tag?
So
Is there a given tag?
when you print your online license, there are tags that are printed, but they are now just a piece of paper. And there's one right next to you, Bob. That's one right next to you.
Okay.
But because of the nature of the fact that it is paper, we also issue the department prints and distributes what we call transportation tags. There you go. Boy, you know what? This is fantastic. I'm just going to bring you everywhere. And so those Tyvek tags are much more durable. They're not affected by snow or water or what have you, whereas the paper certainly can be. And the requirement of the law is that the tag be visible. So if you tie a piece of paper to, say, an antler, there's a high likelihood it's not going to stay there. Those Tyvek ones are much more likely to do so. Personally, I had my plan is I have an index card and a Sharpie and a Ziploc bag, and I'll tie that to the antler. But the idea being, as long as you have the pertinent information, you had to have had your license, i.e. you had to have had your tags when you went out and shot that animal. What's happening, we're finding, is people, because of the lack of the tagging requirement, are going out and hunting, and then it's like, oh, hey, I got my animal, let me buy my license, and oh yeah, I tagged it with that leaf. I had it tagged. And we have no real mechanism to sort of address that because we never addressed what it was. So we're simply saying, basically what we're saying is, if you shoot this animal, you must have had the license for it beforehand because you could not have possibly tagged it if you didn't have the license. That's sort of the layman terms of how we're looking at it. And that's just based on issues that wardens have encountered over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years with, obviously the transition to online licenses happened before that, but that's sort of where we're realizing what some of the issues with it have been. So we're just trying to address those.
So I don't know that it's clear as by reading this.
Yes.
If I don't have the benefit of sitting here at this meeting and listening to your presentation, I'm not sure that as I read this, I am confident that this allows both of those to be used, one or the other.
You could use anything.
Either.
You can use anything.
Or make your own.
You can make your own.
And make your own.
Yep.
Yeah. As long as it has those pertinent pieces of information.
What we're requiring with this language is that the tag include this information. So it must include your name and your tag or permit number. The tag, physical tag itself, like the Colonel said, could be an index card, it could be your transportation tag. But you have to be able to write down what permit number authorizes you to take that animal.
10-digit letters.
Is that because the word tag is in that line? That I can see how that.
Yeah, where it says person's name and tag or permit number.
Would the applicable tag or permit information for that animal?
Yeah.
And so if you look on your license, you have, so if the other thing that I'm not sure if, just came up, but on the new in 2026, because we haven't rolled out there, the individual numbers. Do we roll out the individual tag numbers in 25 or is that coming in 26? I think it's coming in 26. The licenses coming in 26 will have, so I don't know what, if you buy any licenses, but now if you buy your turkey tag, you just have one number, you have just turkey and it's one number for all three tags. Going forward, those will be individualized so that each one of them, so your first bird has a number, your second bird has a number, your third bird has a number, and your buck has a number, your bear has a number. They don't all have the same number like they used to have. When you bought, if you bought 10 tags, they all had the same number. And so that's why we're saying with the specific or the applicable tag or permit. The reason we also say permit is because we issue antler list permits, which are all numerically identified. So that's what that's referring to.
The orange tag refers to the conservation ID, but this language doesn't.
We're changing those because ironically, that's the other thing. There was never any, I don't know why those are on there. There was never anything in law that said you had to fill that out.
Right.
There was never any requirement to fill it out. So we're just trying to close a big gap that a lot of people didn't even realize was a gap, but the wardens have run into it and been sort of
I
unable
just
to.
don't see the tag reflect what the language
Yes.
is.
And that's in the work.
We have a prototype already worked up for it.
We're not trying to make it harder. We're trying to give clarity to something that truthfully has not had clarity ever, really. It just was assumed to be because the licenses had those individual tags.
Any other questions on that clause?
Any thoughts online? Everyone clear with this language? Okay, on to the next.
There's a change at the end of that subsection, just striking where it says the animal is cut up to say until such time that the animal is processed for consumption. We are adding subparagraph B to clarify tagging requirements for landowners that take big game on their own property. They are required to tag the animal with their name and the address where the animal was taken. And if there's an applicable permit number, so this would be if you have an antlerless or moose permit, then you would also need to include that number. Again, just to provide evidence that you have the appropriate authorization to take that animal.
And again, just preemptively, this is, landowners have always had to tag animals, but it was never, again, never written very clearly. So people landowners would show up at reporting stations and they're like, I don't know how to tag it, I don't have a license. Well, you're not required to have a license, but you're still required to tag it. So we're just trying to clarify something that has always existed. And the advantage too now is we can put it in the law digest to say, this is what needs to happen with this clear language to provide landowners with clear information so that they aren't inadvertently causing themselves issues.
So will all these tags be, is there a tag for landowners or there isn't one? So
No,
they'll all be different essentially.
Again, yes. So landowners aren't required to purchase a license, as I'm sure you know, so they don't have a tag. So again, that's why we're saying it has to have these things on it, but we don't care what it is. It can be like we just said, it can be an index card, it can be whatever. It just, you have to have this information on it when you kill the animal and during transport, obviously, to the reporting station or what have you. Which has always been the case. It's just we never identified it very clearly.
Okay. Marty, do you think you're gonna have a lot of people coming into your store asking you for a tag as a landowner?
Yeah, nobody does. They just make them out. They just make something out, name and address, date they kill it, and that's what they've been doing. So it's been working out okay. As long as we get their birth date too. If we've got to look online for them, we need their birth date.
Thanks.
So as it is now with the landowner, because I do this in both things because I only have my own land. Is I just fill out a paper with my name, 86 Sam Webb Road, shop, on my property, and go and put it in a paper Ziploc bag and tape it someplace on the animal.
And you can keep doing that, and all we're doing is clarifying that that's what you should be doing.
Right.
Yep.
And now, and moving forward, all these tags that I see now, just say they all have the same number on them. That every tag is gonna have a different number.
Yes, so they will be species specific, and then my understanding they'll also be animal specific.
Yeah.
So, and again, that is less about trying to trip anybody up and more to address the issue of people harvesting animals prior to purchasing the license.
Yeah.
And then when we learn about it, we can't necessarily say they didn't tag it because we don't indicate what that means. So again, I slapped a leaf on it, I'm good, And so that's why that's one of the issues that wardens have been running into, I'll say, with some degree of regularity.
I really get that being brought up. At the age of 15, of hunting, it was drilled into me to do the right thing. You couldn't move the animal without tagging it. But I guess if you weren't born into it, you don't know.
There's an amendment to subparagraph C now, and this is just to distinguish between the requirements associated with a carcass that you're transporting and animal parts that have already been processed for consumption. So this is the rule we're not changing the meaning of the rule. We are just clarifying that this requirement, a person shall not transport parts of big game animal unless the parts or package containing them are marked with the name of the person who killed the animal. That applies to animals that have already been processed for consumption. So the tagging requirements for a carcass that you're transporting from the field to a check station, for example, that's addressed in paragraph A. This is just to distinguish that there are separate requirements post processing. We also are just saying the name. We struck the requirement that you include the address. It did not seem relevant once the animal had already been processed.
So if I'll just use deer. If I get a deer and I go get it processed and I pick up 30 packages of meat and it's all placed in a box, I just need to have my name on a box.
Yeah,
right?
Typically, I mean, I'm not sure where your process is. Generally speaking, it'll have your name on it, and oftentimes even the packages will say Berlin chops, but they don't always. But yes, if you have the box with your name on it, we're not going to go. This is trying to basically, we're just trying to differentiate this from the other requirement. We're not trying to make it any harder or jam people up. It's just, if we didn't specify, then you have the earlier language about the specific tags, and then later on you have to have your name and address on it, which is not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to clarify. And so, yeah, if you have a box of meat with the name on it.
During during transportation?
Yeah, so that's always been the case. You always had to have it marked technically.
Yeah, but once it's in your freezer, then,
Yeah.
I just.
Once you get it home, it doesn't matter. Truthfully, I mean, my suspicion is, and I don't know if either of you have any ideas, but I think a lot of this harbors back to the days when there was a much greater illegal commercial harvest of deer for profit, which in the 60s and 70s was a significant thing. And so this was sort of something that was, I presume, was to address that. I don't know if you have any other insight on that, but that's really the only thing we could come up with about the differentiation piece. And there were certainly numerous cases of folks from other states coming here and trying to do that.
That's the extent of changes to this section.
Okay. Any further questions on the tagging section of big game? Okay, hearing none or seeing none, if I can get a motion to accept the language as presented.
I make a motion, we accept the language that accepted.
I second that.
Okay, any other questions? Not? All those in favor of accepting the language as presented for 10 VSA section 2A, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, and then the final section is section 5, which we won't have a vote on this, but we can discuss it and vote on it next meeting. Is relative to bow and arrow standards.
This is a very minor change, we noted as we were going through the rules, but currently the language in this section just refers to deer. These standards, the arrowhead size of less than 7/8 of an inch, has been adopted individually into the bear and moose rules. But our thought here was that it made sense to change deer to big game to make this rule broadly applicable in the instance that for any reason these bow and arrow standards are updated. We could do it here in this rule rather than going through the individual rules.
And conversely, every time you'll update one of the big game rules, usually the numbering changes. So then that throws off things on the other end, which is statutory, which takes even longer to change. So if we can reduce the amount of things that have to be put in each one of the big game rules as far as enforcement is concerned, it streamlines things and makes it easier. So we don't then have to go back to the legislature to say this is now out of whack and it's not where it's supposed to be.
Right. So to that end, the next time, for example, one of the big game rules is open, we would propose removing the language that refers to the specific bow and arrow standards, because those standards would be captured in this section 5. So we wouldn't need that specific language repeated in every rule. We could just refer to this. In short, not a substantive change, just a.
I have a question about the term bow and arrow versus archery. And is archery broader than bow and arrow, or are they used interchangeably? Because we seem to use them interchangeably.
Yeah, I mean, if they're used interchangeably, there's not one definition or another that I've not seen one necessarily. I'm not trying to say like take precedent over the other. They're used very interchangeably.
Archery equipment is defined,
But
I believe it's interchangeable with bow and arrow.
Okay, so we won't vote on this, as minor as it is, but it wasn't on the agenda, so that's why we will hold that for next meeting.
And just as a note, the first vote that was made on sections 2 and 2A, the next step will be drafting the filing forms and filing those proposed changes with ICAR. we will probably wait until after you've also had an opportunity to think about and vote on section 5 before we file those. And per the, I will also provide the board with copies of those filing forms to review before they're filed with HICOG. So that'll likely happen after the next board meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. It's 6:05. And the items that we have left is the item we have left is a Black Bear presentation. I know that Abigail ordered pizza for break time, but I don't know if that's here or if we should break now.
Just checking with her.
Okay.
I think it is.
Does anybody here hunt turkey with archery? The 7/8 inch.
Marty, if you have a question, Marty is a good resource. Okay, we're all set. Do you have a quick question?
Oh, I'm just wondering how you feel about the 7/8 inch arrowhead for turkey.
It's the minimum size.
Yes.
It's already required. It's already required.
There's no problem with 7/8 with the turkey. That's not a problem. It's got to be hit right anyway, for one thing. So they make turkey broadheads, but they're really wide, and lots of times they don't clear the riser of the bows, so you got to extend your arrows out. So if you hit them right, mechanicals or the 7/8 will work fine.
Tough. Really tough to kill.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick recess, grab some dinner, and be back here at 6:30. 6:07 now. It'll give us 20 minutes. And thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
I didn't have anything in it, but they were- Every time you found it wants information.
Yeah, that's great.
Still love her.
Pizza was good.
Right side degree.
Good pizza.
They're good.
I the
It's not normal, but.
Blessings are
I never saw it.
Sure, it takes a while. Yeah.
No,
to loosen up those
They're
joints.
not. They must be good.
Let's say Jeff. Jeff.
My age is 71 and a half. not very
Seller's
smart.
disclosure.
Nothing much of that.
Yep.
So.
One floor, this is a fine phone.
Maybe.
And then a couple of UFBs. Yeah. One.
Okay, thank you so much.
No.
That makes sense, yeah. How do you come over through the greens to get here, or how do you, what's the route?
Well,
Do you go
I
up
like
116?
100.
I love
I used- Yes, yes, I am.
Always amazing.
It's just not, it's just that's the thing. I love it, especially if you're carrying your shirt. Up here. Stay there for 2 weeks.
Yeah. So when you think after that day, I'm like. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and just like, how does one do that?
Okay, it was a great break. And next on the agenda is our annual Black Bear presentation. And I will turn over to the commissioner to introduce what we should expect.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mr. Chair. So I think most of you know Jackie. She's our Bear Project leader. I had the good fortune of working with her when I was with the Warden Service and went on some bear excursions working on the Searsburg project. She's an extraordinary professional and has her finger on the pulse of all things bears in the state. In the interest of time, and my knowledge, I'll just turn it right over to her, with the caveat that Director Austin might want to say something. But I think you'll all be enthralled by the presentation, as I always am. I've gotten to see it once already within the last month, so I'm very excited to see it again. And thank you so much, Jackie. I know you're a long way from home, so thank you so much for being there tonight, and have at it.
Hey, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to, one, add to the Commissioner's comments. Jackie Camo has been a wildlife biologist with the department now for over 11 years and has extensive experience dealing with black bear management and conservation. Very fortunate to have her, and I think you'll enjoy the presentation tonight. She's going to focus on all things bear management and ecology related, share with you some of the results from research that's been ongoing that she's been leading. I wanted to just offer a point of context. So we're hoping that tonight is the beginning of a longer conversation between the department and the board around bear management and the bear hunting regulations. So this will sort of set the stage for future conversations that we would like to have with the board to explore possible adjustments to the bear hunting regulations. So that's to come. There's no particular schedule around that. We will go at the pace that works for the board, and we will work on those considerations together. I'm very grateful, Jackie, for you being here tonight. And what?
Here, nice. There we go. Yeah, thank you. So again, I'm just going to go through an overview of the Bear Project. Some of this, for some of you board members who've been on for a few years, will be a little repetitive, or at least reinforce what we've talked about in the past. And then I'm going to give some updates on some new efforts and research findings that we have going on. All right, so again, you're probably all familiar with our mission, which is the conservation of Vermont's fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats for all the people of Vermont. And of course, as you're probably becoming aware, we don't have the resources to have detailed conservation programs for every species here in Vermont. So we have to find ways to prioritize our work. And black bears are a species that we do put a lot of effort into. And that's because we treat them as an umbrella species in Vermont. So we know for black bears to be successful in Vermont, they need access to different types of wetland habitats to find the foods they rely on. They need access to young forest habitats to find different types of foods they rely on. And then, of course, they also need access to mature forests to find other foods that are important to them. And of course, these habitat types are not necessarily right next to each other on the landscape. So we need to also be thinking about habitat connectivity at a landscape scale for these animals to be able to safely navigate to the food sources they need. So if we're doing a good job providing all of these habitats and their foods and connectivity for our bears, it also means we're doing a good job providing these habitats for all the other species that also rely on them. So our bear project can basically be broken down into 4 broad categories. Habitat conservation and management is really at the heart of a lot of the work we do for Vermont's black bear population. And I'm going to talk about each of these programs or aspects of the program in a little more detail. We also conduct research occasionally to better understand the needs of Vermont's black bears. We oversee the state's hunting season, and we use that data that comes from the state's bear harvest to monitor the trends in our bear population. And then, of course, we are dealing with the mitigation of human bear conflicts throughout the state as a regular part of the work we do as well, and trying to find ways to alleviate ongoing conflicts and prevent future conflicts. All right, so the habitat conservation and management. Like I said, this is really at the crux of maintaining a healthy bear population in the state. And so we do have a lot of resources and effort that go into this. And as I mentioned earlier, again, when we're thinking about bear habitat conservation and management in the state, we really are thinking about these 3 broad groups of habitat types: wetland protection, management creation of young forest habitats, and then also the management of mature forests, and particularly those mature forests that are producing hard mast or mainly acorns and beech nuts, and in some cases hickory nuts in certain parts of the state. So when we think about black bear habitat in Vermont, this map here is showing us the distribution of Vermont's bear population by the end of the 1980s. And so those darker green portions are kind of that core bear range in Vermont by the end of the 80s. And then the kind of pinkish areas are where we were starting to document low use by black bears at that point. And then those light blue areas are where we were seeing seasonal use by bears, but not consistent use by bears. And this is really a relic of habitat loss following European colonization of the state, where a lot of the state was converted to agricultural lands. And so it was really the spine of the Green Mountains and remote parts of the Northeast Kingdom where it wasn't appropriate for agricultural conversion. And so there were higher levels of forest retained in those areas. And then slowly, as farm abandonment happened, we started seeing more of the state reforest, which supported the bear population to start expanding back outside of just the mountainous parts of the state in the Northeast Kingdom, but slowly into the valley portions of the state as well. And here in Vermont, we know that a really important habitat type for Vermont's bear population are beech trees. And we're really focused in on these concentrations of what we call bear-scarred beech. So these are beech trees where you can see evidence of repeated feeding by black bears as they climb up the trees to feed on the beech nuts from the branches. Their claws are leaving these scar marks on the thin bark of a beech tree. And so these allow us to identify areas where bears are coming to feed, but more importantly, it's showing us this level of site fidelity where they're repeatedly coming back year after year after year. And research has shown that where beech nuts are an important food source for bears, it is a preferred food source. So there's evidence that bears will select for beech nuts, even when acorns are also available. They prefer to eat those beech nuts. And research out of Maine in the late 80s and early 90s showed that in some of their bear populations, where a lot of beech was an important food source for bears, their female bears were synchronizing their reproduction with the beech nut crops. So typically beech trees, they all mast in unison, but they don't create these big mast crops every year. It tends to be every other year. Adult female bears don't give birth to cubs every year. It's every other year. And so what that study in Maine was finding was that the majority of their mature female bears were giving birth to cubs in the winters following a good beech nut crop. And so we've seen a little bit of evidence of that here in Vermont as well. And so if you look back to this last map I just showed, where the core distribution of bears were back into like the late 80s and into the 90s even, those parts of Vermont are really dominated by beech. And so we know that bears here in the state traditionally had a close tie to where the distribution of beech trees were in the state as well. And so when we think about our habitat goal of maintaining large concentrations of important foods for bears and this landscape connectivity, protecting beech habitat has always been at the crux of this, because again, that's where our bears lived, where the beech was. And so we wanted to maintain this food source for bears. And so we think about our habitat program, we're involved in land conservation, we're involved in actual habitat management on state land. We're also providing assistance to private landowners and helping them think about adequate ways to manage their woodlots for wildlife. But we're also involved in the state's regulatory review processes through Act 250 and Section 248. And that's where this protection for beech habitat is really important. Through Act 250, we've established legal precedents for designating necessary habitat for black bears. And it's really focused on concentrations of hard mass stands that have documented use by bears, and then wetlands that have documented use of spring foraging by bears. And so those concentrations of bear-scarred beech are a really important habitat type that we try to protect through the state's development projects. And along with the habitat protection and management that we're engaged in, we also do a lot of monitoring of hard-massed food sources for black bears and other wildlife throughout the state. So since the late 80s, we've been doing annual acorn and beechnut counts throughout the state to evaluate and quantify this fall food availability for bears. So this graph is showing both the results of those acorn and beechnut surveys from 1988 through 2024. The orange bars represent the kind of statewide average count of beechnuts per plot that we survey. And then the gray shaded areas represent the average acorn count statewide per plot. And then importantly, I've thrown up here these horizontal kind of dashed lines. Horizontal dashed orange line represents anything below that represents what we would consider a poor beechnut crop for bears. And anything above it means it's either fair, good, or excellent. And then the same with that darker gray/black dashed line. Anything below that from the acorn perspective represents a poor acorn crop for bears and wildlife. And above it represents what we consider fair, good to excellent. So, you can look back, in 2024, for example, we had a really poor beechnut crop. But we saw on average, a good acorn crop. It was a little bit skewed because we had actually a really fabulous acorn crop throughout much of the Connecticut River Valley, but then it was spotty throughout other parts of the state that we monitored. And I think the take home from this figure is here in Vermont, since around, 2009, we've pretty consistently seen at a statewide level good beechnut production every other year. And we're out doing our surveys right now, and it's holding true this pattern. This year, we were predicting was going to be a good beechnut crop, and sure enough, that's what we're finding in most of our beech stands. And acorns are a little bit more all over the map. But overall, at least one of these food sources typically is good statewide, although we do have the occasional year where both crops fail. And then the last thing I'll say about just the general habitat work we're doing is that we're also paying close attention to forest pests, and they're thinking about their potential implications on black bears. And so we do have a new forest pest in Vermont. It's called beech leaf disease. It's a non-native nematode that over time will defoliate and can eventually kill beech trees. It first entered the state 2023, I think, was the first year we documented it in Vermont. And then this map over here is a map that FPR, Forest Parks and Recreation, maintains. And this is just a screenshot of this map as of this year so far. We've been seeing it spread really fast through southern Vermont. There is one confirmed detection up in northwestern Vermont. The prognosis is not great. It's only been in the US since maybe 2018-ish. It started in Ohio. And so places that have had it longer have seen that immature beech trees, particularly like the saplings or whips, often die within 3 years of infection. And mature trees can hold on for maybe 10 years, but the mortality rates are pretty high. So there's a lot of concern over what this might mean for bears in the long term. But there's still a lot that isn't known, and a lot of research is going into this right now. So trying to just kind of keep our thumb on the pulse as best we can. All right, we'll transition now to the population monitoring and management aspect of the bear project. So we conduct an annual estimate of Vermont's bear population. We use a population reconstruction model that is basically taking some known things about bear populations, along with the number of dead bears that we have at the end of a year, and then combining that with, again, some known metrics about what drives growth and decline in bear populations, and model back how many bears we must have had at the beginning of the year to end up with that many dead bears at the end of the year. And so we're using those dead bears as a representative sample to help estimate Vermont's bear population. And so we use our hunting mortality data. So we're taking the count and age of female bears and the count and age of male bears, and then that total count to feed into the model. So as the Colonel was talking about earlier, right, making sure we're getting as accurate as possible data from those harvest reports really does feed back into a lot of the information that we use to monitor our populations. So again, the key things we want from our bear harvest data are the count and age of individuals and the sex of the individuals. And then we're also taking what we call our incidental mortality data. So this is data related to bears not killed in the hunting season. It's primarily bears killed by vehicle collisions in the state. That makes up the bulk of this data set, typically like 70% of it. We are also using information from individual bears killed in conflict situations with people, and then just any other random dead bear that the public finds and reaches out to us. We'll go out and kind of document. And we try to get this sex and age data from as many of these as we can, but it's a little bit harder to get that clean, comprehensive data set from that. So at this time, we're just using the total count of our non-hunting mortalities each year and integrating that into the model. And so this is the output of our annual estimates over time from 1972 through last year. You can see the dark circle at the center for each year represents the kind of average estimate that we got for that year's data set. And then we've got 80% confidence intervals, which are kind of the above and below line associated with each dot. And so over time, you can see, right, generally our bear population has been increasing. And then somewhere in kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, we hit a rough estimate of a somewhat stable population with a lot of annual variability going on. But really our population was most of the time during that time period, somewhere between that 4,000 to 6,500 bears, but again, with a lot of annual variation. But you can see it up in that text box at the top there. We're well above that right now. Last year's estimate put us at around 6,800 to 8,000 bears. And we've been at this high point now for a few years. Also on this graph, you can see our population objectives, which those are set every 10 years in our big game management plan. And it's a balance of based on social surveys that we do with the public, estimates of habitat availability, and trying to kind of balance that and set where do Vermonters want their bear population to be, and where do we think the habitat can best sustain our bear population. And so in the last big game plan, the objective range was set to 3,500 to 5,500 bears. And so again, we're quite above that and have been for 4 years now. And so again, knowing that our biggest source of mortality for black bears in the state is hunting, thinking about how we regulate bear hunting in the state is kind of one of our better tools for influencing how big our harvest is potentially going to be and how many bears we're going to be killing each year, which again, we know will then can potentially influence those trends in our bear population. So just doing a quick rundown on the history of Vermont's bear hunting regulations. We did have a bounty on bears here in Vermont that went through 1941. According to some of our records, 1,295 bears were killed during that bounty program. In 1941, we established our first bear season, which ran from June 1st through December 31st. In 1955, it became a requirement that you had to report your harvested bear. 1961, we reduced the season down from September 1st to November 30th, so starting to put it into more of a modern day context in terms of the season length that we're more used to. In 1967, we prohibited trapping of bears. 1968, we put a bag limit of 1 bear per season, or per year, sorry. And then after that, we just started doing a lot of tweaking. 1972, we created the bear dog permit, and baiting was prohibited. And then after that, it was a lot of just general tweaks around the length of that hunting season. So lengthening and shortening that season. And that really for a long time was our best tool for manipulating the harvest in a way that helped us achieve population goals, which again, through a lot of this time was just, let's let our bear population grow and reestablish itself in the state. 2013 is kind of the next important date. That's when we established the early season and the late season, and we established a requirement for the purchase of an early season bear tag. And then in 2017, that is when we made tooth submission mandatory, which was also a really important thing. If you remember back to when I talked about how we estimate the population, we need to know the age of those individual bears. And so before 2017, hunters were just voluntarily giving us teeth. But you saw on that figure of the population estimate, some years we had really wide confidence intervals. And that's an indication that we were violating some of the assumptions of the population model, most likely because the age distribution of those teeth was skewed and not really representative of the population. And you could think about it, right? If you shoot a young bear, you might not be as curious to submit a tooth and get an age back. And so sometimes we were getting data sets that were skewed much more towards just the older age cohorts instead of those younger ones. And then I put the question mark at the end here because again, this is kind of a living process and it can always change. And so the idea of this is to kind of take that adaptive management approach where we can adjust these regulations based on current conditions that can better support our needs and the needs of our bear population. All right, so now we'll just kind of get into some of the specifics on what our harvest looks like. So we actually had a record harvest last year in 2024. We had 1,036 bears harvested, the most we've ever seen harvested in the state. And I'll also point out too, there's the coloration in this figure just represents all those green bars are the annual harvest when we only had the one season. And then later on from 2013 forward, you've got the orange part representing how much of that harvest occurred during the early bear season. And then the blue part of those bars representing how much of the harvest occurred during the late season. Keeping in mind, the early season is 75 days long. The late season is 9 days long. So you're always going to see a lot more orange than blue in those bars. And so you can see, similar to our population estimates, we're starting to see this kind of stair-stepping increase in our harvest. Really up until the 90s, our harvest was relatively consistent. And then in the 90s, it started really bumping up. And you can see we've got kind of a rolling 10-year average, which is that black bar in this figure. The other thing I'll just say is that I put on here the total harvest average just for the past 5 years, because really we're even seeing the past 5 years, we've seen a real big bump in our harvest compared to the previous 5 years. So that 10-year average is interesting, but you can see even our last 5 years is well above even the 10-year average. And then the other thing we're noticing, which again, we've only had a little over 10 years to be monitoring this early season versus late season. And in the grand scheme of things, right, we're really looking at trends over time. So it's hard to make big inferences from this, but we are starting to see in more recent time, it seems to be more of an increase in how many bears are being taken in that early season, or the percent of bears being taken in the early season. So you can see over the whole time that we've had the split seasons, on average, about 74% of our harvest occurs during the early season. But just over the last 5 years, we've seen 83% occur during that early season. Again, it's just something we're keeping an eye on as we think about how to structure our bear seasons. And some other kind of metrics from the harvest. Last year's harvest, 2024, if you take that mean estimate of what our bear population was in 2024, the harvest took about 14% of the population. If you look at the average over the whole time we've been monitoring the population, our harvest on average takes about 9% of the population, but it's ranged anywhere from 4 to 17%. That early season in 2024, 90% of the harvest occurred during that early season. Keep in mind, we had a really poor beech nut crop last year, and that can make a big swing in the late season. We pretty consistently see a lower harvest during the late season when we have a poor beech nut crop. And it's primarily because most of our bears enter their dens for hibernation earlier when there's less food on the landscape. So we just have less bears available for harvest during that late season in a year with poor beech nuts, which is what occurred last year. But again, if you look at the overall average, we're at that 72%, but it ranged from 52 up to 93% of that harvest can occur during the early season. Another thing we're really paying close attention to is the percent of males in our harvest. So last year, 55% of the harvest were males. We see on average 58-ish% of the harvest is typically males, but again, there's a lot of annual variability. It can range anywhere from 50% males to 66% males. That's what we've experienced thus far. And then the percent of the harvest coming with dogs, 13% in 2024, which is pretty close to the average of 15%. That range of it can be anywhere from 6% to 26%. Those extremes occurred a long time ago. We really in modern days seen it pretty consistent in that kind of 13 to 15% range. And I'll also just make a plug. We have, every year we put together a harvest report summarizing the bear season. And those are available on our website.
Is there a target that you would like to see for the male harvest?
Well, so one of the assumptions of our population model is that males are more vulnerable to harvest than females. So big picture wise, that's good that it, we're not violating that assumption, because then if we started consistent, some states do, the way their seasons are structured, do actually skew to more females than males. We would need to use a different way to estimate our population if that's what we had happening here in Vermont. And again, you think about it, females are your drivers of your population, right? So we need to have females in the mix if we want the harvest to adequately serve as a bit of like a control on population growth, or to have that potential. But we also want to be conservative about that too, because right now our bear population is high, but if we were at a point where it was really low and we wanted to be facilitating more growth, that's what you kind of are paying attention to.
The reason I was asking, I was curious why it was representing the males versus the females, and why you focus on one.
I could have written it the other
Okay.
way. Yeah,
Right.
it really doesn't matter. Again, we're looking, really what we look at is like the sex ratio, which is like a little bit weirder of a number. So I feel like putting it into percentages, it's just more palatable to more people. Yeah. We also, here's a distribution of that harvest. So the red map is showing the distribution of last year's harvest. And so again, you can see last year we had a relatively high harvest throughout a lot of the Connecticut River Valley. Again, like I mentioned earlier, we had a really good acorn crop in the Connecticut River Valley last year. And then the other side there, the more yellow to red map, just represents what the harvest looks like from 2020 through 2022. And I just put that in there to give you, again, a little more perspective, because we see a lot of annual variation from year to year in the distribution of our harvest as well. And it really just depends on where the foods are and where the bears are on the landscape. And so in years with good beechnut crops, we'll again, typically see more of that harvest coming from the Green Mountains. And then in years of poor beechnut crops, we often see a bit more harvest happening in the valley parts of the state. And then I also just wanted to share a few results. Last year, we conducted a survey for hunters in Vermont. We talked to a lot of different hunters, but one subset of that survey involved specifically targeting bear hunters. So here are some of the results from that. The group that we hired to conduct this survey spoke to 960 bear hunters. 75% of those folks had hunted bear in 2023, and 62% had hunted bear in all 5 of the previous 5 bear hunting seasons. So they talked to a fair amount of avid bear hunters. And some of the take homes that we think are helpful to think about when we're thinking about, again, managing bear hunting, thinking about the types of folks who are engaged in bear hunting and what's important to them. We found that incidental bear hunting still is the most popular form of bear hunting in the state, with 54% of those respondents saying that when they're out hunting and potentially going to harvest a bear, they're out actually hunting for a different species. And then it's just if a bear comes through, they decide they will harvest that individual, versus 31% of respondents who reported that they specifically go out hunting to target bears. Of those folks that are targeting bears during the early bear season, they report hunting an average of 9.3 days to target bears, versus those folks who enjoy targeted bear hunting during the late season, they're hunting about 4.4 days. The the survey asked an open-ended question, just like what are your motivations for bear hunting? And meat or utilization of meat and the pelt or different products to be utilized from the bear came out as the primary motivation, with 67% of respondents indicating that's one of their primary motivations for why they enjoy bear hunting. We found really like split preference for the early versus the late season. About a third of respondents said, I prefer hunting for bear during that early season. A third of respondents said, I prefer hunting bear during the late season. And both groups had specific reasons for their preferences. And then the other third of respondents said they like hunting both equally. And then we also asked, so I mentioned like this was a larger survey for all license holders. So a lot of folks who were surveyed do not hunt bear or did not end up being part of the bear hunter specific part of the survey. But those folks were asked, those folks were also asked if they hunted bear. And so these are, again, falling into more of that opportunistic incidental bear hunting group. So all the hunters surveyed, 13% said that they hunted bears in 2023 and 18% had hunted bears in at least one of the past 5 seasons. And again, there was a ton of questions in there, but these are some of the bigger take-home results. And then the last thing I'll say for this section, so we just spent a lot of time talking about the harvest side of the mortality. I mentioned before, we have these other sources of mortality happening in the state, vehicle collisions being the primary one. And so we are, like I said, that those are going into our population model, but we are also thinking about their influence. When we think about the percent of our bear population that is subjected to at least the documented mortality events that we know about. And so, like I said earlier, we're on average, the past 10 years, our harvest on average has been taking about 13% of the population. But if you lump in all of the mortalities, it bumps up to on average 16%. All right. And so now we'll shift gears and talk about human-bear conflicts, which again is a big effort that we work on with the department. And this is why. So this figure is showing the annual reports of human-bear incidents that our department receives each year, going back from 2002 through last year. And so, you can see for quite a while, things were relatively stable. And then around 2012, we started to see these increases in the number of reports that our department received, with real drastic jumps beginning around 2016. And then in 2020, we had this huge jump, which we've basically maintained since. And so it does strain our resources at times. And we're putting a lot of effort into thinking about how to assist folks in a way to maybe lessen the amount of these incidents, or at least to help facilitate better outcomes with these incidents. The other pattern that I've highlighted in this figure is this dark shaded bars. So you can see since around 2012, we've been getting these every other year bumps in reports. And if you remember back to that figure I showed with the beech nut crops, this kind of follows that, where we've been seeing the year after we have a good beech nut crop, we see a spike in reported human-bear incidents. Why would beech nuts be driving that? It's something we're still trying to wrap our heads around, because most of these reports are coming in May, June, July, and August. Beech nuts are available on the landscape for bears, late September, October, November, December, and then again in a little bit in April before they start to sprout as seedlings. So this isn't like a one-to-one relationship where when beech nuts aren't available, bears are leaving the woods and going into town, because bears aren't feeding on beech nuts when all of these conflicts are happening. We think there might be more of an indirect relationship going on here, where there's some sort of population level effect where, again, maybe our bear population is synchronized reproduction with our beech nut cycle or our beech nut crops. And therefore, in the year after a good beech nut crop, we have more sows with dependent cubs on the landscape, which also means we have more naive 2-year-old bears on the landscape. And that might be what's causing this. That's our best guess at this point. And then if you also throw onto here those non-hunting or incidental mortalities, which are the orange kind of diamond shapes here. The interesting thing here is, again, we've seen this increase over recent years, but we're also seeing the same alternating pattern. So in years of higher reports of human bear incidents, we're also seeing higher non-hunting mortalities. But again, these are not being driven by bears being killed in conflict situations. This data set is driven by vehicle collisions. It makes up, on average, about 70% of these mortalities. So again, we are seeing this clear every other year pulse in the number of bears killed primarily on our roads here in Vermont, which again, it could be somewhat driven again by little increased pulses in our bear population. It could also be driven by, we know that when beech nuts aren't available, bears are searching for alternate foods in the fall. And so we do occasionally see pulses or increases in the number of vehicle collisions occurring in the fall. And it may just be that bears are navigating in, a fragmented landscape and therefore intersecting with roads more in those years. So what's driving our human bear conflicts? Well, we know the bear population and the human population are both playing a role in this, their size and their distribution. Where more bears and more people are sharing the landscape, there's just more opportunities for interactions. We also know wild food availability is driving this. Research is very clear throughout black bear range that your average bear, when wild foods are abundant, is going to select for those wild foods. But when wild foods are scarce, bears are going to increase their time searching for an alternate food source. And one of the most widely available alternate food sources on the landscape that are consistently available to them are human-caused foods like bird feeders, garbage, backyard chickens. Okay, so I basically said that, yeah. So we know when wild foods are limited, we're getting more human food options. And then, of course, bear behavior and human behavior are playing into this as well. Again, the research is pretty clear that bears will learn over time. And so the more opportunities they're given to discover or have to rely on a bird feeder or a garbage can when wild foods are scarce, that's a learning experience for that animal. And we see some individual bears over time will shift to what we call habituation, where, food conditioning, where instead of only turning to those human-caused foods when their wild foods are scarce or limited, they just start making foraging for bird feeders an everyday, regular part of their diet, no matter what the wild food availability is. And then the more time they spend foraging close to people, near our houses, our barking dogs, us, they become habituated. They become less wary, and they just come and go as they please, irregardless of what we're doing at the time. And so from all those reports of bear incidents that we receive from the public, we're tracking different data from those reports. And a big one we key in on is, all right, well, what was the human food source involved in that incident? And when you look at this figure, garbage is by far and away the leading cause of why people report a bear incident to Fish and Wildlife. Bird feeders and backyard chickens are kind of neck and neck for the second leading cause of why conflicts are occurring, and backyard compost follows those. And again, this isn't a perfect representation of what the problem is on the landscape. We only hear only a fraction of the people dealing with bears in their backyards even take the time to report things to us. So we already know that the reports that we receive, again, are just a sample of what's actually happening. But we also know with a data set like this, there's you know, there's certain types of things that people are definitely going to call. A bear smashes through your chicken coop and kills your chickens, you're probably going to call. But if a bear rips down your bird feeder once, twice, you might not bother reporting that. If a bear tips over your garbage can, no property damage involved, you're probably less likely to report that. So there's certain things that we don't hear about, but again, we still feel like this is giving us a relatively realistic pulse of the types of problems we have in the state. And so when we think about, all right, well, how can we mitigate this? Like there's a lot of high level stuff we can do. We can continue to protect habitat for bears, try to make sure that we're maintaining high quality wild foods on the landscape so they aren't forced to be seeking out these food alternatives. We can continue to try to manage the number of bears in the state, which again, the harvest is really our only controlled way to do that. But again, we're trying to structure a hunting season with an eye towards sustainability, right? Not necessarily to drive a population so low that we don't have to deal with the problems of them on the landscape anymore. We can try to change or manage bear behavior, but the reality is that we struggle to create enough negative interactions or experiences for that bear that outweigh all the positive food rewards they receive. So unless we can clean up all of those bird feeders and garbage and backyard chickens and compost, it's really hard for us to go out and reteach that bear that this is a dangerous activity and not worth their time. So really what we're trying to focus on, we're doing all of those things above, but we're really trying to put a lot of effort into changing people behavior to kind of achieve a better coexistence with these animals. And so again, we have a ton of resources out there. We do a lot of outreach. We use a lot of different formats for getting the messages out there. But I think one of our better ones is that we have a reporting form for folks on our website, or they can call their local warden. And those reports, every single report we receive, we follow up with that person and offer advice specific to their situation. And I think that is one, is a tedious, hard way, very slow way to get information out, but it is effective and it does really help those individuals who are experiencing problems figure out how to better secure their attractants to prevent future problems. Starting late last year, we entered a contract with USDA Wildlife Services, and it's a joint contract between us, FPR, and Wildlife Services. And they have a team who are now helping to respond to all of these reports that we receive, or at least they're now becoming the first level of response. And then if things escalate, they're looping in wardens or me and my team. So we're kind of increasing and expanding our workforce to try to better help with these individual cases. Oh, and then another thing, I didn't have a slide for it, but for 2 years now, we've also been partnering with Vermont Coverts, which is a group that it's like a peer-to-peer information sharing group initially designed for landowners. So landowners can learn from each other, connect with professional resources out there to think about how to appropriately manage their land and achieve their objectives for their land management. We've been working with some of their members and putting them through a multi-part training, and we're calling them bear ambassadors. And the idea there is to get these individuals who are already engaged and interested in their community to be sharing information, to teach them about, all right, here are the key messages that people need to know about how to secure attractants and prevent conflicts with bears. And so we've kind of been giving them that information to spread in their communities. Because what we're finding too is you go on to any town's front porch forum or local Facebook group, and there's so much chatter about bear issues, but our staff are not keyed in to all of these different forums. And so we're trying to engage more local community members to start taking a more active role in helping their neighbors and friends. And then the final thing, which Kathy Gott mentioned earlier during her public comment is that the Agency of Natural Resources as a whole have now become members of Fairwise. This happened last year as well, but I think this has kind of been our first summer really laying that out. And this is great because at Fish and Wildlife, we have a lot of expertise about how to talk about bears. But Forest Parks and Recreation don't necessarily have that same expertise, and DEC doesn't necessarily have that same expertise, but they're all involved in this, right? Our state parks have plenty of bear issues, and then DEC regulates solid waste management in the state, which is also garbage and compost, big players in all of this. So we're trying to make sure that we are all, as an agency, speaking with one voice about this. And that way, when we're talking to the public and sharing information to the public, we're all pulling from the same kind of toolbox in terms of the messages and materials. And so Bearwise is this, well, I think it's still just at the US level at this point, but it's this overarching umbrella of resources and effective talking points to talk about how to coexist with bears. And the nice thing is that their website is a lot simpler than a state agency website for the public to navigate. And they also have a lot of great materials already developed that we can use or other entities can use to promote bear coexistence in their community. And then finally, we're just going to talk about research. I'm just going to give you really just updates on one study, the Deerfield Wind study, which I mentioned this briefly last year. We were starting to kind of get the final results together, but now, we really have the final results compiled. We're working on getting them into kind of an agency report right now. But this is a big partnership, a lot of years. I'm just gonna mention, we've worked with a lot of folks on this, but most recently, researchers at the University of Alberta, Tani Dupuy, who's the master's student, and her advisor, Dr. Mark Boyce, who helped us with the data analysis. USA Wildlife Services, Westing, and the Forest Service were also really key partners on this study. And the study was looking at black bear habitat selection in response to wind energy development, specifically the Deerfield Wind Project, which, for those of you who are not familiar, the Deerfield Wind Project is a 15 turbine energy project across 2 ridge lines. One in Searsburg, Vermont, and the other in Reedsboro, Vermont. So very, very southern Vermont. You can see the infrastructure for Deerfield Wind is represented by the orangish yellow coloring there. So you can see there's a substation, roads, pads for the turbines, transmission lines. It's the first wind project in the country to be built on the National Forest. So it's within the Manchester district of the Green Mountain National Forest. And from our department's perspective, the real key concern about this project for us was the amount of bear-scarred beach associated with this project, which is represented by those black squiggly lined, kind of lighter green shaded areas. So a little over 3,000 acres of concentrated bear-scarred beach habitat was on this project site. And we were really concerned about the potential implications that this wind project would have on black bear habitat use. He advocated that this would be too much of a disturbance and this habitat was too important for bears. And we advocated that they find an alternate location. Long story short, we did not win the day in that argument. So ultimately, the Public Utilities Commission granted the permits for this project to go forward. But as part of the mitigation package, there had to be habitat conservation of bear-scarred beach in other parts to replace the habitat that was lost. But then the energy company needed to fund a study to evaluate the potential impacts. So looking at those objectives for that mandated study were understanding how important is this beach habitat for bears? Does the development and operation of the wind facility change the habitat used by bears of this? And if so, what are the consequences of that? So we actually began collecting data for this study. Significant data collection began in 2012 and ran through 2019. And the study is really broken down into 3 key sections. There's the pre-construction phase, which ran for 4.5 years. There's the construction phase when they were building the wind facility, which ran for 1.5 years. And then we continued the study for an additional 2 years after the wind facility went into operation. And the data sets we were collecting were locations from GPS collared bears. We were trying to maintain around 12-ish collared bears during that entire timeline. And then, of course, we were also evaluating acorn and beech nut productivity during that study as well. And so you can see that during the pre-construction phase, we had 2 good beech nut crops. And during construction, we had 1 good beech nut crop. And then during operation, we had 1 good beech nut crop. And then when we take all of those GPS locations, I should say the callers were collecting a location every 2 hours and 50 minutes. So relatively fine resolution documentation of how bears were using that landscape. We then evaluated all of their GPS locations at kind of 2 spatial scales. The landscape extent, which you can see once we started collaring bears around Searsburg and Reedsboro, those bears are actually using a good chunk of southern Vermont, parts of eastern New York, and the northwestern corner of Massachusetts. So again, these animals need a ton of space. And then we also analyzed the points at this local extent, which ultimately ended up being a 1.5 kilometer buffer around the Deerfield Wind Energy Facility. And so real quick, just an example from one individual bear, and then I'll tell you what the result from all the bears looked like. So this is a female F30 who we had collared for, I think, 4 years total over the course of the study. Here are her locations during a good beech nut fall during that pre-construction phase of the project. So before any construction began, these are her locations just during the fall when we had a good beech nut crop. And you can see those yellow circles are her locations, and they are just sucked right in around one of those big concentrations of that big bear scar beech habitat. So you can see heavy use of that habitat type by this bear during that fall. When you compare that same bear's locations to a good beech nut fall during that construction phase, so you can see she didn't abandon the site and totally leave, because this area really was at the center of her core home range. This is where she lived. But you can see that she shifted to using different beech stands in that area. And then if you zoom out to all of her points during that construction fall during the good beech nut crop. So again, here's the Deerfield Wind Facility. This is what we were just looking at. You can actually see she also that fall made this bigger long distance movement up onto Glastonbury Mountain, where there are more extensive stands of bear scar beech. And so she actually traveled a decent distance away in search of more beech. And I'll just show one more map from this same individual. So here you can see all of her locations over the 4 years we had her collared. And again, that real cluster of all of her locations represents that core home range that she occupied right around the Deerfield Wind Facility. But you can see at one point she made this huge southern movement into northwestern Massachusetts. And that was during a fall when we saw poor beech nut production, but really abundant acorn production. So she traveled south into Massachusetts, where the forest transitioned from beech dominated to oak dominated to take advantage of those acorns in that poor beech nut year. So again, just showing you the full kind of scope of how these animals are moving on the landscape.
How many miles is that?
Oh gosh, that's how it's one. I mean, it's probably a good 6 miles one way, 6 to 10 miles, depending on where you'd start and end it. We had some individuals, males in particular, could go crazy distances, but we even had a couple females who, one fall again, we had poor beech nuts in the study area and poor acorn crop in northwestern Mass. And one female went all the way down to like southwestern Massachusetts. So again, their willingness to move is impressive. So when you take, again, you can't learn anything like truly important at a population level from one individual. You've got to pull all these bears together and analyze all of their locations together. But when we do that, some of the major findings we found from this study was that before wind development, we saw that yes, bears were selecting for that beach habitat across all seasons. So even when there weren't beach nuts on the landscape, like during the summer, they were still spending a lot of time using that beach habitat. The one time they were not selecting for that beach habitat was when it was the fall and there's a poor beech nut crop and an abundant acorn crop somewhere else. So again, key food sources during the fall are so important for these animals that they are willing to travel for that because they're trying to put on weight before they enter hibernation. And then we also, during that, before wind development began, generally we saw that these bears avoided highly developed areas. So they were primarily staying in the forest away from people. During the construction phase of the study and the operation phase of the study, overall, we didn't see a reduction in selection for beach habitat, but what we saw when we zoomed in to that 1.5 kilometer zone around the wind facilities, that we did see a reduction in use of beach habitat close to the wind facility. And so what we saw was bears were shifting and selecting for beach habitat farther away from the wind facility. And that kind of, oh, and again, we saw that effect extend out to 1.5 kilometers away from the wind facility. So pretty far out, all things considered. The other thing we saw from this was this increased likelihood of selection for developed areas. So we didn't see bears like all of a sudden spending all their time in highly developed areas, but we saw a significant reduction in their avoidance for those highly developed areas. And that was concerning to us, you know, thinking again about all of the human bear incident reports that we receive. We want to avoid creating learning opportunities for these animals to learn about anthropogenic or human-caused foods. And so these types of disturbances can potentially be contributing to that learning process. So again, overall, you know, the major take home from this study is it just reiterates the importance of protecting high quality habitats for black bears. And then the last thing I'll say is, you know, you may have heard in the media that we've just started a new study this summer. Most of the research we've done traditionally has been focused around understanding habitat use to help us guide our habitat conservation efforts in the state. We haven't done a lot of specific studies looking at like the population itself and the metrics that might be driving, causing increases or decreases in our population. So we started a new study where we're trying to assess the productivity of our bear population and the relationship that major foods have on that productivity. So we're looking at reproduction is really what we're focused on here. We've got 2 study areas. The green area here is what we're calling our Southern Green Mountains study area, which represents that traditional bear habitat. And then we've got our blue study area here, which is the Southern Vermont Piedmont or Connecticut River Valley. So trying to represent this kind of new habitat that bears have access to now in Vermont. We're collaring it right now. We've got, our goal is to have 9 GPS collared adult females in each of these study areas, so a total of 18 bears. And we're going to kind of monitor them over time. We're counting the number of cubs they're having, the sex ratio of those cubs, and how many of those cubs survive through adulthood. We're also monitoring the survival of those adult females. And then, like I said, we're using their GPS locations from their collars to evaluate the habitat types and major food sources that they have access to. And so we're trying to see it. Do bears potentially, are we seeing this big increase in our population because our bears were really restrained to the Green Mountains in the Northeast Kingdom for so many decades, where you could argue the habitat quality is actually lesser compared to the valley portions of our state where you now have beech and oak, and just a lot more plant diversity and therefore a lot more food diversity for bears. So we want to try to see, are we seeing similar reproduction and survival in these two systems? And then we also want to see, like, how does access to human foods potentially influence this? So how does access to agricultural lands with corn influence this, and or a lot of residential development that bears might be taking advantage of? Really, that's everything. That's the Bear Project in a long nutshell. I like to just end all my presentations with this quote, because again, all of this centers around trying to think about how to best support our bears and our needs on a shared landscape, thinking about, you know, how we can find some sort of compromise and achieve some balance. But that, any more questions you guys have? Or did I overwhelm you to the point where, yeah.
I think it was on the Bear Wise slide. They had ways to keep bears away from your property or whatever. Do electric fences actually work?
Yes, they're great. Yeah, so we kind of have these like Bear Wise basic or Bear Wise steps, and electric fences are a big part of that. You need to understand how to properly set it and monitor it, right? So just like one string of electricity at a low voltage will not work. But if you have it, your fence designed appropriately, and you've got the voltage high enough, and also we recommend folks even bait it. So put a little bit of like tinfoil with bacon grease or peanut butter, something that's going to force the bear to make contact with the electricity in a sensitive part of their body. Because bears are rugged. They've got thick fur, thick hides. We've seen some bears, they'll just kind of shoulder under it. And if they just get the zap here, it might shoot them into the enclosure. But if they touch it with their face, they will stay out. And I'll also say to that partnership with USDA Wildlife Services, that's actually an additional thing that they're adding, is along with just the advice and assistance to thinking about how to secure attractants, they actually have an electric fence loaner program. So they will temporarily loan out electric fences to people. They will help them set them up. They will show them how to set them up and monitor them, while trying to encourage the person to invest in their own electric fence. The idea is, here, I'm going to show you how to do it so it's not intimidating. And I'm also going to show you how well it works so that you're willing to make an investment in getting one for yourself.
Go ahead, Ryan. You're gonna ask?
I was just curious if you have an idea on crop damage values.
Ooh, I don't have a specific number, but we hear from a lot of dairy farmers and farmers who grow corn that, some crop fields are not terribly hit by bears, and others, they get hit bad. And again, this is a learned thing. So some individuals, they will just go back year after year after year. And we've even seen it with a few of our, I can think of a couple of our females that we just collared this summer, seeing it firsthand how they just sit in some of those cornfields. With our last study, I remember we had one male who was very smart about it. He'd stay in the tree line during the day and then just go in at night and just sit there. I think anecdotally, some farmers are like very frustrated and they feel like it is really impacting their bottom line, the amount of damage. And then other farmers, you talk to them and they're like, it's just part of doing business, and they're able to kind of accommodate for it in other ways. And I mean, we've got some wardens here who deal with it firsthand. If you guys want to make any additional comments from your perspective. I know, Nate, you must get plenty of calls in your district.
It's busy.
Yeah.
I was curious, is there any correlation between poor beech nut years and complaints of corn damage?
Oh, that's a good question, Mike. And honestly, the corn damage stuff is not as thoroughly documented as some of the other stuff. But I haven't looked at it specifically, and it's probably worth looking at. Yeah, because it does feel like what we saw when we've got bears collared is that in a good beech nut year, those collar bears were definitely spending less time in corn. Yeah.
What's the bear number at right now compared to last year?
It went up a smidge, but it's still in the same ballpark as the past few years. We're in that kind of 7,000 to 8,000-ish range. Maybe upper 6,000s. Yeah, it's like I said, for the past few years, we've kind of been hovering in this kind of upper 6,000s to 8,000 range. Yeah.
What about the kill this year? So far,
it's we kind of do like a week by week breakdown, where we're below where we were last year at this time. We're below 2020, which had been our previous record before last year. But we're above some of the other more recent years. But again, it's so hard to know until we get to the end of the season. So just because we're at a certain point right now, it could totally change next week.
I have a question. How is the, and I don't know to what degree you take these measurements, but in the deer herd, we know how the health of the deer herd and whether we're overpopulated or not based on certain weights and measures. How is the bear population as it continues to grow?
Oh man, it's more complicated than deer, unfortunately. Yeah. So because again, we've got this opportunistic omnivore that has a very diverse and flexible diet, who's eating a lot of natural foods, but is also very willing to eat all of our artificial foods we put on the landscape. And again, their weight can fluctuate like crazy amounts from year to year. They don't grow anything like antlers that we can measure to kind of give these indications of like habitat quality. So it really, it's a tough target. So we don't have like a good detailed kind of like metric system like the Deer Project has to kind of check, all right, is our population in line with what the habitat can support?
But your best guess would, I mean, it seems like Vermont has plenty of habitat. It's just getting the bears into their natural habitat is the issue.
And that's a tricky one too, because you could argue, well, maybe part of the reason we're seeing all these reports of bears in town and backyards is because there's more bears than what the habitat can sustain. And I suspect that as we get our bear population up into these higher points, that's probably a contributing factor. But again, there's this learned behavior part of it too that can really muddy the water, where it's like, or are these bears just choosing to eat bird feeders because they're so easy to find, and they're just exploiting an easy food source, even while there's adequate habitat out there for them. It's really tough.
So
Jackie,
the beech bark and the beech leaf diseases are really concerning to me. Like, and we've had beech bark disease now for, I don't know, decades maybe, and now beech leaf disease. Is anybody like the Forest Service or anybody doing any work looking for resistant trees? Breeding resistant trees?
So with beech bark disease, it's been here since like the 60s. It's been here a long, long time. And beech trees look terrible aesthetically, and some are dying because of it. But at an ecosystem level, they're able to persist despite this what seems to be somewhat debilitating disease.
Do they still produce?
They do, yeah. So I will say those beech nut surveys that we do, I mean, probably 99.99999% of the trees that we are surveying are not resistant to beech bark disease. They are all infected with beech bark disease. Some of them show levels of tolerance to it. They are still producing nuts while dealing with beech bark disease. And I will say our beech nut survey so far this fall, we're seeing beech nuts, including in some stands that have beech leaf disease. So they're still producing the nuts. The issue becomes if these diseases cause the mortality. At some point, they just become too sick to put any more resources into producing mass. And it is concerned. I'm very concerned. Last year I was, feeling a lot of turmoil over it as we were really first starting to see the effects in southern Vermont where I'm based. Forest Parks and Rec, there is research going on out there, trying to better even just understand the nematode and transmission and how it's moving, and then trying to figure out, are there ways to effectively treat it? Nothing super promising at this point. What we're learning is that transmission seems to potentially be coming like through the wind, from birds. It's like this microscopic nematode that can move very easily. And it seems to, I just heard from a forest health forester that I think it seems to be able to survive drought and rain and freezing. And so doesn't look yet like we found any serious checks on it. Forest Parks and Recreation is organizing a beech leaf disease working group, which myself and some other of our staff are going to sit on that, with a variety of folks who are concerned about this and who are dealing with, forest management, forest products industry, research, ecosystems, all that stuff. My fear is just that it's moving so fast that I don't know how much influence we're going to have on it. And the hope then becomes that there is just some natural resistance and tolerance out there that will allow beech trees to persist on the landscape. But there's still just so much unknown at this point. I will say the less bad news about all of that, again, is that I am concerned over the relative short term the implications will be for Vermont's bear population, because we do seem to have a lot of reliance on beech nuts. But bears live in a lot of places where there are no beech nuts. We've got bears living in the boreal forest, all the way down to the tropics, in like Florida, in the deserts of the Southwest and Mexico. So I'm optimistic that our black bear population will be fine in the big scheme of things. But I think there are going to be some potential growing pains if we lose beech from our ecosystem.
Just, if I could could I just remind folks that this is a conversation between the board and the Department of Fish and Wildlife at this point, and members of the public are not invited to participate at this point. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. Any more questions for Jackie? Anyone online? Any questions? Members of the board?
Is there any discussion to make the season longer?
Yeah, so, John mentioned at the beginning, we are going to be evaluating bear rule. And so we're kind of got a whole bunch of different things on the table to talk about. But as I said earlier, the length of the season traditionally was kind of our go-to tool for influencing the harvest and therefore the potential population trend. So that's definitely one that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Why do we have a split season?
So it was a little bit before my time. My one big part of that was that before we had that split season, we had no way of even identifying who was actually hunting bears versus hunting deer, right? Because everyone just got their deer license or their deer tag, and then they could take a bear. So we wanted to create this early season where someone had to buy a bear tag in order to participate in it, so that we could at least start to identify how many people and who is actually interested in hunting bears in that way. I suspect we left the late season the way it is because we knew that opportunistic bear hunting was just culturally like a really important thing for a lot of folks when they're out deer hunting during the deer rifle season. So we left that. because we knew that was a big part of our harvest. It was a big part of the hunting culture. And so for multiple reasons, we wanted to retain that. And I don't know if anyone who's been here longer than me can add to that, but.
It makes sense, you know, thank you.
But one of the, I think I asked this question last year too as well too, is that, you know, a lot of the, one of the areas that we as a board, I know get a lot of pushback on is hounding for bears. But there are a lot of benefits from a management perspective that they provide and those hunters provide. And if we didn't have the ability to hunt bears with hounds and remove that 13% or 15% from the annual harvest, what kind of impact would that have on our bear population? I mean, it gets to the point where at some point, I don't know if you lose control of the bear population or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it obviously is contributing to the overall harvest, but a relatively small amount. So if we didn't have hound hunting, yeah, we would have to think strategically about how to recoup that component of the harvest. You know, and the other side of having hound hunting is we do use it as a conflict mitigation tool as well, particularly for farmers. I mean, you know, I know anecdotally, I know a handful of hound hunters who do help run bears out of garbage and like small to medium livestock situations for folks.
Cornfields.
But cornfields is really the big one. So a lot of farmers either reach out to our wardens or again to hound hunters directly. And again, it's another non-lethal tool to help with that, trying to add some negative experiences to outweigh potentially those positive food rewards. And corn is a tough one, right? We have all this advice on how to properly secure all of those other attractants I listed. Corn is the one, but there is not a lot of realistic, reasonable solutions out there. So dogs are a good one. Dogs are kind of the best thing we've got to offer to farmers to try to non-lethally deal conflicts. And I'll say anecdotally that can cause its own issues because a lot of the hound hunters are very selective on if and when they're going to actually harvest a bear, and a lot of the farmers are at a point where they're frustrated and would prefer less selectivity to be happening. And again, it does create a way to try to create negative reinforcement. And then I'll also mention, we do use them for our research as well. You know, we've partnered with hound hunters back since, like, you know, Charlie Willie was our first bear biologist, to help capture bears for a research project. So, you know, they do serve as a partner. It's a small group of hunters, but we do tend, you know, try to work with them on different ways where we look for opportunities to collaborate where we can.
Just out of curiosity, in that survey that you conducted, did you ask the age of the bear hunters?
We did, yeah. So we did ask all of those kind of standard kind of demographics. So we had it broken down by region of the state, whether they lived in, like, you know, rural, town, city, that kind of stuff, and their age. And gosh, I can't remember the number specifically off the top of my head, but the folks participating in bear hunting did skew a little bit younger than some of our other hunters. Yeah.
Interesting. I thought you were gonna say it was going the other way.
No, bear hunting is one where it actually seems to be going the other way, where younger folks seems like we're recruiting younger people into bear hunting.
Is there a limit on bears that a hound can take, a hound handler can take?
No, it's just based on the hunter. Yeah.
But the hound permit gets reported.
But the hound permit gets reported, exactly, yeah. So there's a permit that goes with, you know, a pack of dogs. And And then there's, you know, the hunting, that their tag itself that is associated with the hunter.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Jackie. Very informative.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner, time for the update. Commissioner's updates.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Jackie, that never lets us down. Really fascinating. So I'll try to be brief. I don't always succeed, but I first want to say a big thank you to Andrea Shortsleeve for and I know I've done this for some of you already, but it's worth saying again. Andrea stepped in at a time where she was needed and performed remarkably, given her tenure with the department. And yeah, I don't think there was anyone, including myself, who wasn't thankful and blown away by her ability to manage the staff and the legislature and all the dynamics that go along with the job. And so big thank you there. I'd also like to offer a thank you to the board for the time that you spend and the reaction and the reactivity and the sort of the thankless nature of the position that you're in. I know I didn't get to talk to all of you at the potluck we had, but you do occupy a crucial space in government and in the lives of many Vermonters, hunters and anglers and trappers, but also the more non-hunting community. More and more, you're extremely relevant in my life, and even as a retired person over the last couple of years, and then again back in my state capacity. So thank you for everything that you do. People pay attention, and they're engaged, even though sometimes the room doesn't seem as full as it could. The effects of what we do and what you do are felt. So thank you so much. And I'd also like to say a special thank you to the members of the public who take their time to join and comment. I was very impressed with the comments tonight, and I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to the people who may not feel they have the ability to meaningfully affect change on wildlife and habitat, and sometimes may feel like they're swinging at windmills, and maybe even beating their heads against the wall. But your public comment I wrote down every public comment. I'm going to reflect on it. And it's very kind of you to thank the individual divisions who are out there trying to do their best. These are all vocationally driven, mission driven employees, and they are humans, and I know all of you care deeply in your own way about Vermont's wildlife and beyond. And it goes a long way when you're here, when you're thankful, and when you're proposing meaningful changes. We pay attention. We may not always be able to agree on the outcome, but thank you very much for your presence and for your efforts. I know you're not all, most people aren't getting paid to be here, but I certainly know you are not. So thank you to the members of the public who choose to be here. I just wanted to go over three quick things. I wanted to go over some priorities that I've established for the department, some legislative proposals, and then just maybe give you a fun little glimpse into my life over the past couple of weeks, and then we can depart. And I know you all want to go home, so I will be quick. So when I came to the department for the second time, July 28th, I had some suggestion about setting some priorities, because speaking of our staff, they are worked to the extreme. As Jackie said, we don't have capacity to have nuanced programs sometimes, but but we make up for it in effort and certainly sweat equity. And so I thought setting some priorities would be um, a responsible governmental step, so I can allow some of my folks to have some breathing room when they get 10 phone calls a day. They may only have to deal with 2 or 3 of them because their boss told them his priorities. And that's the only reason I did this. I didn't do it because I thought I had all the great ideas. I thought I would do it to give some people some breathing room. And so I'll be quick about them. First is to maintain and foster a culture within the department that people want to join, basically a great place to work. Um, and it is, right. I think that people that have preceded me have succeeded in that. 155 Fish and Wildlife employees can carry their own culture, but I feel like if we can keep it and we can make it a place where people want to come to, Vermont will be better for it. The second one, creating and maintaining opportunities for Vermonters in the outdoors. And I know there was a comment in the room about creating another opportunity. I don't know where that'll lead us, but I feel like exposing some of those opportunities is important. And I also feel like stating some of the things that we do often so that we don't regress into a place where someday we may not have these opportunities. Because I do feel the opportunities that we have earned in the way that we have the wildlife, because of the efforts we have made. We have the wildlife that we can maintain and enjoy, and all Vermonters can enjoy. Take fisher trapping, for instance. That's 31 days, and the other 11 months of the year, there is no fisher trapping. So I feel like there is enormous balance that we have offered, and I don't want to regress into a place where we wouldn't have these opportunities any longer. The third is aiming for long-term financial solvency while undergoing relevancy-based restructuring. And we are entering into that as we speak through hatchery management, through a benchmark study that we are undergoing that is going to steer us, sort of become our true north in the way that we operate as a fish and wildlife agency. It's relevancy studies that continue to keep us on track and engage with all walks of life in Vermont and beyond. And that's what we aim to do. Not easy. We aren't earning the money that we used to earn, and so part of that is going to be finding new ways to fund ourselves. And I think we will get there. Make sure I've got my list on track here. Couple legislative proposals I think you'll find interesting, and then we can turn it back over to the chair. The first one, and we alluded to this earlier today in some of your appendix discussions, is a proposal to increase big game reporting station fees. The fees have been $1 since the 70s, and we have been green-lighted by the governor's office to move on with increasing those fees, and we're gonna shoot for $5 per animal that a big game report station would report for us. We think it's due. We think it will pay dividends, and not all of this money would come from our department funds. There would be match that's included with this. The second, I think, ties into Jackie's presentation, which would be an effort that we would undergo with DEC to mandate that trash haulers provide bear-proof containers when a customer requested it at cost. And so if you look at towns where there are resorts, or you look at towns where there are high densities of restaurants, basically any town in Vermont these days, and you go up, your respective mountain road, you see the effects of unsecured trash, and you see the effects of bears on that, and we all know what happens. And so we feel it's a responsible step to take, and we have quite a bit of buy-in from the majority of the industry, but we want to make it a plainly stated thing that we would like to see these trash containers offered to their customers when requested. Some states are light years ahead of us, and we understand that. and they are seeing the benefits of it. So that'll be a really interesting one. And I have more, but I'm gonna pare it down. And the last one is a license fee proposal, which is something that I would guess at this point hopeful for. Hasn't been fully green lighted by the governor, but seeking a license fee proposal for a couple of strategic areas. Archery tags. We've provided archery hunters 44 extra days to archery hunt, so we feel like we could see a small increase there in a strategic one. As you know, there will be a buck tag available next year. We're going to try to get ahead of that and see a moderate fee for a second buck tag. And then some of the other standard fees I don't have listed, but there are some that haven't changed in a long time. The antlerless permit fees haven't changed since their inception. Those are currently still at $10 and $25. Heck of a deal. And so wanted to state those because I think they're interesting, and would love to take any questions you have on those. Before I just wanted to tell you a quick story about a youth hunt that I had, and then I'll get out of here. Any questions about any of those that I can answer for you? Understanding my computer's telling me I have bad network quality, so maybe you all didn't hear any of that.
Oh, we heard it all. We're
Good. Well, feel free to raise your hand. I just wanted to tell you, I took my son and a first-time youth hunter for their first waterfowl hunt the Sunday of waterfowl season, and we didn't limit out on ducks or anything. We managed to scratch down a hen pintail and a hen wood duck and a hen mallard. But I had we were hunting on a wildlife management area in Newport, in Coventry, South Bay, and I really felt like I was transported to another state with the amount of other wildlife that we saw, including the plants and the water insects that I just was marveling over. We're experiencing a drought and the water was down. We had to haul our kayaks and canoes 50, 60 feet through the mud to get to the water. But the pitcher plants that I saw and the giant water beetles that I saw in this wildlife management area were enough to make the day for me. And just in addition to the 7 or 8 species of ducks we saw, including gadwall and pintail, which I rarely get to see, eagles and all the species of seagulls you would expect to see. We saw an American golden plover, which I don't think I've ever seen. These are birds that of course Merlin is telling me that I'm seeing. But an American pipit, we saw a palm warbler, a yellow-rumped warbler, which I have seen, and a Lincoln sparrow, and not to mention all the other common ones. These wildlife management areas are under a bit of your purview, and I just thought it was worth mentioning because any of the non-hunting public could have gone there that day and enjoyed everything that we enjoyed, except the great meals of duck that we had. But I just wanted to mention that because I found it just fascinating to have that experience on one of the department-owned pieces of property, and that's certainly something that the board has allowed to happen over the course of time. So just wanted to say a special thanks for that. I'm done, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything else to say. Thank you all for what you're doing. And again, I have a sick child, or else I certainly would have been there. And I apologize for not being there, and I will do my best in the future. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who stay in there late.
Well, thank you, Commissioner, and welcome aboard to the department.
Thank you.
You are, for a small department, relative to the rest of the state government, you guys surely do have some tall tasks. And but fortunately, you are blessed with a very talented staff. So I think achieving your goals and objectives, I think, will be almost a certain thing, if not a certain thing. So Jackie, perfect example tonight, a great presentation, a lot of knowledge. I know you could go on for hours and share stuff with us that would all be very, very important. So good job and good luck. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to share or questions? If not, I have a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, second. All in favor? Aye.
Right.
Being adjourned. It seems late.
It's getting shorter.
Yeah.